Welcome to William Steele, True Crime and Steal the Spotlight Television. We have a phenomenal show today. Thank you for watching on Inmate to Roommate. I have tens of millions of fans. Season 2 is about to drop in a few days on A&E Network. Thank you so much for all the outpouring of love and support and encouragement. We have a phenomenal show today, brought to us by a phenomenal individual, Tom Madden of TransMedia Group in Florida. Lamar Burke case of actual innocence. What I believe he's actual innocent, but we're going to present facts from both sides of the spectrum here. But he was put in prison partially because of a corrupt DEA agent, Chad Scott. Let me bring on my guests and guest hosts onto the screen here and introduce everybody. So we have Ignacio Esteban, my esteemed co-host, retired ATF agent, author of 80 books, the new voice of History Channel, Gangland Chronicles on a few shows. So we both have network shows now.
Thank you, Bill.
Yep. And Peter Strasser, very, very high-ranking former member of the Justice Department. He was appointed U.S. attorney in Louisiana. I'll let him give you the details because I don't want to butcher it here. But this guy was appointed by the President of the United States, and he's now in his post-life of prosecuting cases. He was then a defense attorney. Now he's doing other things. I'll let him describe that. And he's on this analyzing it, and he has bad feelings about this conviction all day long, but I'll let him explain why. And Peter, thank you so much for coming on to the show with Ignacio and I.
Thank you, Peter. Nice. What about, and also Navy background too, retired Navy Captain Reservist, right, in the JAG program?
That's correct.
That's awesome, man. Phenomenal career, man. Congratulations. Congratulations.
Well, thank you, Bill. Thank you, Ignacio. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, can you please, for my audience, now we're here for the case of Lamar Burke out of Harris County, Texas. And so first give us more about your background, your resume, so to speak, for my audience, so they know who you are and the prominence you're bringing to this show and to this case as somebody who's just analyzing it.
Well, thank you, Bill. I was a federal prosecutor, assistant United States attorney in New Orleans for many years. After that, I transferred to the State Department, where I worked on anti-corruption and law enforcement development in developing countries for about 15 years. I retired from the government, went to work for a private law firm where I worked as a criminal defense attorney, as well as some civil cases. And after that, I was appointed by President Trump as the United States Attorney in New Orleans. Then with the change of administration, I retired, and now I work on independent consulting projects.
Okay, so with that resume, my audience now knows who you are. We're going to put some more information and links in the bio about you, as well as Ignacio and our books and things. So how did you first become aware of this Lamar Burks case? We have a corrupt DEA agent who is now sitting in federal prison, and another active police officer who's evidently killed more people in the line of duty than anybody in the history of the United States, which we're going to be allegedly all day long here, but I think where there's smoke, there's fire. So how did you first become aware of Lamar's plight and his 70-year prison sentence for a murder that evidently he was in a whole nother state when this happened?
Well, the family contacted me about 6 months or so ago because they had heard about me in my capacity when I was a criminal defense attorney during the 2017-18 time period before I became United States Attorney. I'd worked on a case representing a client under the Court Justice Act who had been accused of drug dealing as well as homicide. And as I dug into that particular case, well, the case agent was Chad Scott. And as I dug into the case, I uncovered evidence to the fact that Chad Scott had planted evidence against my client. He had pressured through threats and intimidation other witnesses to testify falsely against him. And he had set up a lure to lure my client into a drug deal because he refused to become an informant for Chad Scott. He lured him into a drug deal where the other two who were informants working for Chad Scott pulled out guns, started shooting at my client, who had suspected something like that would happen. And he was there with another fellow who pulled out an AR-15 and then shot and killed the two who were shooting at them. So it was a real mess. But the more I dug into it, Chad Scott's fingerprints and manipulating everything, including planting a gun in my client's car, stealing money from my client's wife, but to the tune of about $800. Make a long story short, that case was then settled. My client pled guilty to drug dealing. The homicide charges were dropped, and he went into jail. It was a 10-year offense, but 10-year sentencing deal, but he got out after 6 years federal charges because he went to a drug rehabilitation program. So that was a success, and many other Chad Scott cases were being litigated at the time. A lot of those were dismissed. Some were settled the same as mine. Mine was one of the first ones. And as a result of that publicity that came off of that case, the family had contacted me.
So you're being part of exposing him for what he is, really opened the floodgates of other cases being re-examined that he was involved with.
Yeah, and what I did not understand at the time or realize at the time was independently of what I was doing, the Justice Department was investigating Chad Scott. So all of that sort of exploded at the same time. So the last thing the Justice Department needed was a trial, which in our case, we were going to go to trial and put Chad Scott on trial. They did not want that, and that's where we're able to resolve the case.
Let me ask you, Peter, you were the United States Attorney when Chad Scott was being tried in Eastern District of Louisiana?
Yes, and of course, I was recused, and my entire office was recused from that case. So DOJ had two prosecutors they sent down from Washington to handle it.
Oh, okay. I was wondering about that. Yeah, he got 13 years. I listened to that podcast you recommended. Interesting there. If people haven't heard it, I recommend it. Go to the binge on Apple. The White Devil, right? It starts with that's his nickname they gave him there, and his ties in with Schumacher was interesting. But his handling of informants, I'm a federal agent. I give him a little background how I do it. It's appalling. You have to document. There's things set up there for a reason. He cut corners there. He endangered people's lives allegedly. What I can see, what I was reading, and everything else, and it was disgraceful action. Unfortunately, very disgraceful what happened there. And this is where we're going to lead to where you help the family out. You can tell us about Lamar Burke's situation here, where this seems like a trend that's going on with this task force that's going out there, and with this case there called the Rap-A-Lot right there, and run out of the Houston area. And it appears like all indications he may not even have been there for the shooting.
Right. And Lamar's position is that he was at I believe, a casino in Louisiana. There's allegedly there's video evidence and a phone call. I don't know how precise that timeline is. But so, Peter, give us some overview of the case now. There was a gentleman, condolences to his family, Perry, I forget the
Earl Perry.
So, we're not trying to minimize the fact that somebody was killed here. We're just trying to say that perhaps there's an innocent guy in prison for the last 24 years because of this corrupt DEA agent and his activities with an active police officer that may or may not have been involved as well. So what else? Tell me what your read is on this case. Give us some analysis of the posture of this case and why you think that some of the developments tend to show he may actually be innocent.
Yeah, and let me start by saying that I have absolutely zero stake in this case. The family is not paying me. They asked me if I would just look at it and give my opinion. So I did. I looked at all the documentary evidence in this case, looked at the case files, and again, just from my looking through it, it just appeared to me glaringly obvious, based upon my 30 years in criminal law enforcement, that this was a miscarriage of justice here. So it just hit me personally, having been on both sides of the fence, and the theory that was drummed into us in law school in our criminal defense courses, our criminal justice courses, was you'd rather let 100 guilty men go free than send one innocent man to jail.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that philosophy has not made its way through to many elements in the police forces, many elements in the prosecutors' offices, not in the federal system. There are many safeguards built in, so this really doesn't happen. But in the state, unfortunately, it does. And in New Orleans, for example, the United States Supreme Court has knocked down the district attorney's office in New Orleans under Harry Connick two times, for hiding exculpatory evidence. And as I looked at this case, I saw the exact same pattern here. So the facts of the case Again, it gets to be a little complicated, but to simplify it down to its basic, Earl Perry was shot and killed at 3 o'clock in the morning on May 30th, I believe it was. Correct me if I'm wrong on the date.
June 30th, Peter.
June 30th. June 30th of 1997. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Put my glasses to read my notes.
Yeah, 97.
Yes, it was 97. And is one of those classic situations. There's a dice game going on outside in the streets. There was an argument, and he was shot. There are, of course, many witnesses, and nobody saw a thing, right? And except one thing was for sure: two people did the shooting. So one person actually shot and killed Earl Perry, and another person kind of shot more as protection for the shooter, so they could make their getaway. So the question is, who were those two people?
Right.
And the only reason why Lamar got wrapped up into this thing into the first place, and as you noted, he wasn't even there. He was actually in Opelousas, Louisiana at the time. And his alibi, and I'm going to digress for a minute. You said, well, how precise is the alibi? Well, no alibi is ever precise on the moment, and that's why alibis are always so difficult to prove, and they're also very difficult to disprove at the same time. But Lamar, the day before, in the afternoon, was driving from Houston to Opelousas, and he made a phone call at around 5 o'clock in the afternoon to his mother, who was in Opelousas, to let her know that he was coming and was on his way. So that's really the only marker we have. That phone call was done at Lake Charles. Then he gets to Opelousas, where, again, as you noted, it was a celebration for his sister's wedding. The family members noted that he was there. There are affidavits to that effect, and that he was there and stayed there for the next few days. The problem, of course, is the shooting's at 3 o'clock in the morning. So theoretically, obviously, he could have said, I'm going to bed. That's at 11 o'clock, driven 3.5 hours back to Houston, gotten there just in time for 3 o'clock, shot him, and then turned around, gotten back to his car, driven back to make it up in time for a breakfast. So, yeah, and one could make that argument, but again, it's highly doubtful.
Yeah.
So Lamar wasn't there. And so the question is, who are the two shooters? The problem is there was an individual named Kevin Scales, and all of this is public. There's nothing that's private or government secret information here. Kevin Scales and knew Lamar back from high school days. And apparently they were competitors or rivals for the affection of the same woman. And Kevin also had some drinking problems. And when the police came to do the various interviews to see if they could find somebody who could ID who the shooter was, the pressure, the family apparently, according to Kevin, sort of put some pressure on Kevin to identify Lamar as being the person who did it, simply because the two people who did do it, which was a Darren Whitaker and a Clayton Brown, they both worked for Lamar. So there was a tie-in, and they worked for Lamar, and Lamar had a record-producing business called, I'm sorry, I forget the name of the company.
Was it Rap-A-Lot or
had an
something?
office right there. No, Rap-A-Lot belonged to somebody else.
Yeah.
That was under investigation by the task force, and that's how that gets tied in by Chad Scott's and Schumacher's task force. So Kevin Scales is pressured by the family, and he also had too much to drink, as he did at that time. So he identifies Lamar as being the one. But a few days later, he kind of has second thoughts about that. I can think he sobers up a little bit, and he retracts that. But that's really the only identification they have, and the police and the district attorney had gone forward on his identification. So when Kevin Scales then retracts his identification, saying, "Look, I was drunk. I really didn't. It was just the wrong thing for me to have done. This is bad on my part. I apologize, but I shouldn't have done this." The pressures were there. And so then they're left with nothing. So the DA's office then dismisses the case at that time. So it lays dormant up until 1999, in September of 1999, it gets revived again. And this is where it gets interesting, is the date of when it gets revived. And that, in my looking at it, and this is from what I can tell, the newspaper has given a lot of publicity to these cases at the time. And recently, as recent as 3-4 years ago, there was a motion for a new trial. And much of the stuff I'm talking about was brought up at that time, but not this. And again, this is just my logical deductions and looking at the documents in this case. But in September of 1999, the task force that was being run by Schumacher, the agent that you're referring to, who's been involved in numerous shootings, and Chad Scott, who of course is the agent from initially from New Orleans, then or New Orleans area.
We have
Then he went to
Schumacher.
Houston and worked in the Houston area. I'm sorry.
Schumacher on the screen here.
Oh,
Then
okay.
we have the incarcerated.
And then and that's Schumacher, I believe, and he eventually testified before a congressional hearing. I'm going to talk about that.
Yep.
So in September of 1999, Chad Scott's and Schumacher's, the task force that they were working in the Houston area as a DEA task force, combination of federal agents and local police agents that get together to lay out a vast network of law enforcement to see if they can catch the drug trafficking that's going on in the Houston area. And these task forces are very common. They're done in major cities throughout the United States.
Are we referring
to New Orleans?
Are we referring to like a HIDTA task force? Are we referring to like a HIDTA?
Something like that. It's not a HIDTA task force, but it's something like that. So that task force in late September had been the subject, the tail end subject of an investigation by the Department of Justice, the Office of Inspector General, for basically doing the same things we saw with Chad Scott 10 years later. And that was that they were intimidating witnesses, they were physically abusing witnesses, and they were stealing the possessions, the property of suspects in their investigations. So as a result of all of that, the task force in late September was shut down. And needless to say, the Scott and Schumacher and all the other agents were not very happy about that because they thought they had a good thing going. They'd been wrapping up a lot of drug suspects. They thought they were cleaning up the drug problems in the Houston area, but of course their methodology was less than what meets constitutional standards, shall we say.
Yeah.
But they didn't quite appreciate that. So they were very angry.
They were enriching themselves illegally in the process and planting evidence and all kinds of stuff.
Disgraceful, tainted badges for sure. Unbelievable. Shameful.
Well, so they were shut down, but they were told they could still work on ongoing cases. Well, that was in late September of 1999. And perhaps a week later, Chad Scott and Schumacher rolled into the Houston police force office, and they come up with an informant of theirs, a guy named Randy Lewis. Mm-hmm. And this is within 1 week now, right? And Randy Lewis conveniently connects Lamar Burks, who was, of course, the original suspect, connects him, number one, as being an associate of the Rapalot records, which they were investigating, and they had an ongoing investigation on, and which was really the subject of the Department of Justice investigation, where they were intimidating and stealing. He associates Lamar Burke with that group. And oh, by the way, I was there, and Randy Lewis was there. I was there, and I saw Lamar Burke shoot and kill Earl Perry. So they have now solved the case. So this way, by connecting Lamar to Rapalot records, and by connecting Lamar to an unsolved murder, they are now showing, again, this is my deduction here, because I just don't believe in coincidences when it comes to the criminal justice system. They now can show that they are viable, ongoing task force that should not be shut down, because look how they are cleaning the city up and solving unsolved murders.
They're trying to
so that's how
they're trying to justify their existence, one, to continue enriching themselves, and two, to really try to backpedal and avoid maybe getting charged with all the crimes that they're committing.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
And now Randy Lewis, he confirms the fact there were two shooters. One was Lamar, and the other one was Darren Whitaker. Well, they track Darren Whitaker down to a federal holding facility. I forget where, but somewhere in Texas. And Whitaker currently is under state charges where he just received a substantial period of imprisonment, I think around 12 years, and around the same amount of prison time on federal charges for drug dealing. So he's in for the long stretch. So Schumacher goes to visit Darren Whitaker in prison, and lo and behold, not too long after that, Darren Whitaker now becomes the star witness against Lamar Burks.
Whitaker was in
And
federal
he says,
prison at the time? Was he in federal
I'm
prison?
sorry?
Was he in federal prison or
He
state?
was both state and federal.
Both.
And he was in a federal facility at the time, I believe.
Because I know in
Holding
the
facility for
federal
federal
system, that
prisoners.
if they want to cooperate or lie about somebody, they can come back. What is it, Rule 35 or 19 or something like that? It's like a cooperation
Correct.
rule to reduce the sentence.
Correct.
And so
And
have a lot of questionable
and
information.
Whitaker was doing right. And Whitaker was doing about 13 years, and not too long after all of this, after he testified at the trial, his sentence was dramatically reduced and he was released. Well, Whitaker, like I said, there were two shooters in this case, and as the evidence will show, those two shooters were a man named Clayton Brown, who was this accessory shooter who fired to protect Whitaker as they were getting out, and Whitaker. And remember, both of them worked for Lamar Burks in another recording studio. So that's how it's all linked. So Whitaker now apparently there is some sort of arrangement reached between Chad Scott and Schumacher and Whitaker, in which Whitaker agrees to testify at a trial. And he will testify at the trial that it was Lamar Burks who was the shooter, and the second shooter would have been Clayton Brown. In reality, the primary shooter was Darren Whitaker, and the secondary shooter was Clayton Brown.
And Lamar Burks most likely was not even there.
Correct.
The
It
very
looked
guy-
like he was in Opelousas for his sister's wedding.
The very guy
And,
who's approached, the very guy, Whitaker, who's approached in prison, hey, let's make a deal.
Unbelievable.
Lie conveniently for us, we'll get you the reduction. He evidently, allegedly, is the actual shooter. And here's Lamar.
And I guess, right, go ahead, Bill.
This poor guy sitting in prison 24 years later, in my opinion, completely falsely convicted.
But what appears. And interesting that Whitaker and him and Perry were in disagreement over a dice game, I guess, while I was reading. And I guess Whitaker gets slapped in the face by Perry. He takes offense to it, and he takes out his 38 allegedly and shoots him. And then Brown gets involved too. And of course, poor Burks is not anywhere near the scene, but these two guys do work for him. So all of a sudden, he gets thrown into the loop, and that's what he's doing so far, 25 years. Wow.
Yeah.
And that's the same pattern is what we saw in New Orleans, and especially with my client, in which my client had just been released from prison for again drug dealing, and he gets out of prison, and Chad Scott was the one that sent him to prison. When he gets out, Chad approaches him and wants him to become an informant, and my client says no. So Chad uses his less than savory methods to try to frame my client. But this is what we see when you have a finite number of shooters that is known, in this case two, but the evidence comes from informants. Well, who those two shooters are just depends on who's in favor and who's out of favor at that particular moment.
That's right.
So what we have here is Randy Lewis was forced, as he later tells us 4 years ago in an affidavit, the same MO. He's threatened, he's intimidated, he's threatened with serious jail time if he doesn't testify before the grand jury that it was Whitaker, and at the time before they come to Whitaker, that it was Whitaker and Lamar Perry, and Lamar Perry being Lamar Burks being the primary shooter before the grand jury. So he goes before the grand jury and basically says that. But then when it comes down for trial, and now Whitaker becomes the star witness, and it's all something that seemed appeared to have been arranged by Chad Scott. Randy Lewis wants nothing to do with this, and he says, I could not in good conscience go before a jury and falsely identify Lamar as being the person who done it. So I refuse to testify.
Right.
And they get Clayton Brown, they round him up too. And Clayton Brown, he refuses to cooperate in any sense. And Clayton Brown, again, comes up with an affidavit about 4 years ago in which it says, likewise, I was threatened, I was offered an early release for my role in all of this if I would just identify Lamar as being the primary shooter. But again, I could not do that. So Clayton Brown ends up serving 5 years, but he refuses to testify at trial. So when it comes to trial, which is now almost a year later, this is now in October of the year 2000. The situation is you normally, when you have a case like this, you want two witnesses to identify the defendant as being the one who did it. If you don't have any independent corroborating evidence in the case, you want to have two witnesses. But right now they've got one. They've got Darren Whitaker, who we now believe many years later is the one who actually did it. He goes on the witness stand.
Interestingly, and I'm going to jump ahead for a second, then we'll go back. Out of everybody who's recanted now and said that Chad Scott, former and now incarcerated DEA agent, and allegedly his partner, have coerced them and coached them and everything to say and do to put Burks away, innocent. It's interesting that Whitaker is the only one not recanting, because to recant means the possibility of it spinning around on him and him being charged with murder.
And possible death penalty for him.
Yeah, isn't that ironic?
Yes.
Lamar Burks. We're going to humanize Lamar here. So this is his at the wedding, some wedding photos and all that. Let's see what else we have from Lamar. So this is him in the local news. Lamar, this is some of the support he has. Free Lamar Burks.
That's
We're
nice.
going to keep rolling. Now, I know at one stage the NAACP got involved. I'm not sure if they're still engaged or not. We have an attorney who seems to jump on a lot of these cases. I think he's a good guy. I think he's well-meaning. So Ben Crump has been engaging in this, right? I don't know that he's still involved either. But so we have this guy whose life's been destroyed, and I saw an interview with his daughter, how she's just crying her eyes out. And I know what it's like. I have 2 children, and I did what I did. I was guilty when I went to prison for. I feel I got too much time for nonviolent crime at the time. But to be separated from your kids is like one of the worst things on the planet. I can't even. That's like I wouldn't wish that my worst enemy. I forgive my family, my sisters. Got me for $800,000 inheritance. They told my mentally ill mother I was dead. I can forgive all that, because in the end, I look at myself. I am a Christian now. I'm not a Bible thumper, but I do have a strong faith. And when I spoke to Lamar over the past several days, and by the way, I just did a phone interview with him yesterday. That's going to be going up either with this or right after this. He talks about his faith more than his case. He's on point. A lot of people say people get jailhouse religion, but I've stayed consistent with mine when I got out. So it's not a fake thing for a lot of people. But he seemed like a good guy. He's very articulate. And he's just putting it in God's hands. And I think there is a little, maybe with anybody in my situation, I filed some post-conviction things in my cases, and you get emotional and you get caught up and you make bad decisions. You piss off your lawyer. The lawyer pisses you off because they're not doing their job. And so I was a law clerk in prison, and I've seen both sides of that, where the guys in prison sometimes are their own worst enemy. They have something positive to help them, but they piss everybody off by the accusations and, thinly veiled threats sometimes. And they're like, well, I don't want to look at your case. So it's kind of a trade-off. Now, I just want to bring everybody back to how we got together. So Tom Madden is a dear friend of mine. He's the former vice president of NBC and ABC. He now owns TransMedia Group public relations firm in Florida. He represents Ignacio here.
Yes.
He is coming on this particular case, Lamar Burks, completely pro bono. He's been engaged with it for many, many years, various capacities. He he's such a great guy. Like, he was my pen pal. His wife was dying of cancer when I was incarcerated. I was her prayer partner. I would call up every day. We'd pray together. She passed away, sadly. Tom is a wonderful guy. He paid for one of my college courses when I was in prison. So I want to tell you that we have a heck of a team here.
I agree, Bill.
It shows up that you guys at your caliber are willing to come on a show for a guy like me with my past. So I really appreciate it.
And Bill and I have been doing shows for a year and a half, Peter, and it was good talking to you. But I think there's something here, and I think we know what's right and wrong, especially with our background, especially with our character. And Lamar Burks, 25 years. I couldn't imagine the best years of my life incarcerated for something I did not do.
It was bad enough getting draconian sentences for nonviolent crimes. I can't imagine sitting there innocent, accused of that.
70 years, sentenced to 70 years out of Houston, being railroaded by these two guys. One's a supervisor, by the way, Bill. It wasn't his partner; he was his supervisor, and he was involved in a lot of things in that task force. It's unbelievable what was going on. I've been involved in a lot of task force, and I'll be honest with you, I have never seen or heard anything like this in my life. This is just disgusting. And if people do the job the right way, this is not the way to do it. And I want people to understand this is not the way a lot of us do our career, our job. This is just dirty tactics, poor tactics.
So in my books, I write them from the point of view of crime victim advocacy and crime prevention. One about Robert Durst, who's on HBO Max now, The Jinx, and another one about Ghislaine Maxwell. And in all my books, in the front, I put a quote from Lamar Burke. All that's needed for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. So I look at you two and Tom as, those good people that there's nothing in this for you. You're putting your reputations on the line by even coming forward on any case, let alone a case like this where, who wants to step up for some black guy serving time. And in this society, sadly, it's like that a lot of times. And I know for many times I've helped guys reach out to Innocence projects, and they only want to take the most serious cases, the life sentence cases, the death penalty cases, DNA provable innocence, or coerced confessions, and the packet they'll send into these guys who are basically illiterate, could be 20, 30 pages long of information they want before they'll even review a case to accept it for the Innocence projects. And because I have some college, I'm helping these guys fill out these things all the time. They're getting rejected. 99% of the guys get rejected for help. So to say that people of your caliber are coming in to, to at least give your point of view on this case says something. And when there's smoke, there's fire. And this guy, Chad Scott's no good. Got a lot of people in prison and in trouble over the years. And so Lamar Burke needs to be freed, in my opinion. Now, I do know this, and I want you to continue what you were saying, Peter, but I do want to interject a little bit. Ultimately, the case now, fast forward, ends up into the Conviction Integrity Unit of the Harris County Prosecutor's Office. Now, that unit, according to Lamar, is the only one in the country that won't review a case of possible actual innocence unless and until there's nothing further pending in the courts, appeals, habeas corpus, post-conviction relief. So he's clear of all those at the moment, but they're delaying him possibly taking other action by sitting on this. So we know that these people historically have probably acted in very good faith, believing the detectives at the time, believing the DEA agent. So, and that's always what you see, when we acted in good faith, we didn't encourage anybody to lie. We get it. So now, all these years later, there's a whole different, a crew of people in there. I'm not sure the prosecutor's name, but that integrity conviction unit needs to take a close look at this and fast track this. We believe. I have tens of millions of fans. You guys have stellar reputations. You guys are career law enforcement, law and order guys. I was a career criminal, unfortunately, who was a law clerk, and I know what I see, and I don't let people on the show with these type of cases unless I fully vet the case. And if they're withholding stuff, I don't put them on the show. If they're lying to me, I don't put them on the show, because my reputation post-incarceration means a lot to me. That's why I got choked up a minute ago, and I apologize for that.
No, that's fine. Peter, what's going on now? What else can we do to help this Lamar Burks, and where can we take this?
Yeah, you continue whatever you were saying earlier, and then let us know what can be done.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you talked about the last thing you talked about is the fact that it's currently with the Conviction Integrity Unit. So, needless to say, nothing in life is entirely 100% easy and clean. And there is one hiccup in this case, and I think we need to talk about that. And that's why I don't think anything's moved forward. But much of what I just talked about was the fact that Randy Lewis and Clayton Brown have now come forward and said that, hey, we were threatened and we lied and so forth. That evidence had been put together by an attorney that Lamar's family had gotten back in around 2018, 19, I think, and they filed a motion for a new trial. And that motion was pending in the state court system. But Lamar, and this was all publicized, Lamar then made the big mistake. And as you had noted earlier, when you're in prison, it just does things to one's heart and soul, and as well as brain. So you're not necessarily the same person you were when you went in. And Lamar, for whatever reason we can't quite fathom, got on the telephone, and all telephone calls in jail are recorded.
Yep.
Got on the phone, and number one, called a representative for Chad Scott. And Chad Scott at that point in time was pending federal trial in New Orleans, and said, look, my family's going to have a press conference, and we're going to have a hearing in our case, and we're going to subpoena you for this hearing. But if you don't show up for this hearing or something to that effect, then we won't hold the press conference, which would negatively affect you. Well, needless to say, that's pretty akin to extortion. So he did that. And then secondly, he calls up some representative for Randy Lewis, who was the witness who testified before the grand jury, falsely before the grand jury, and who then signed an affidavit to the effect that I lied before the grand jury. I lied because I was intimidated, I was threatened. And there was a recording that a member of Lamar's family, I believe, had made with Randy Lewis, in which Randy Lewis was apologizing for how he had lied in the grand jury, but he had refused to testify at trial. But that information that he refused to testify at trial was never given to Lamar's defense counsel at trial. That's what we call exculpatory evidence under Brady versus Maryland. The prosecution is required to turn such information over to the defense, and they had not. And they had not turned over to the defense the information about Clayton Brown being offered leniency if he would testify against Lamar, and Clayton Brown refused to perjure himself and testify against Lamar. Again, that information had not been turned over to the defense. At this point in time, now we're in 2019, 20, somewhere around there, 20, I believe. Lamar makes another phone call from prison where he talks to a representative for Randy Lewis and says, for a reason I cannot quite figure out, he says to that representative, just tell Randy that he's got to tell the prosecutors that he's got COVID, because it was during the COVID time period. He's got COVID, so therefore can't show up at any hearing, which makes no sense because he would want Randy Lewis to show up for his hearing, just testify to his innocence. So I don't understand what his logic was or what was going through his brain. But as a result of that, which was done without his attorney's knowledge, his attorney resigned from the case. The court allowed him to do that. And now Lamar is without an attorney, and the hearing is coming up. And this has happened. And we basically have, as was publicized in the newspapers in Houston, the Houston Chronicle, you basically have witness interference by Lamar. And you have a statement by the witness integrity unit, conviction integrity unit, at Houston, saying anybody who's has his neck out for Lamar should be giving this a second thought, because look at him, he is trying to get witnesses to basically not testify. He's interfering with the criminal process. So obviously he must be a guilty man, because that's a guilty conscience driving him. So the case has died, and it's languished now up until today, when the family is trying to do a new push, which is why they contacted me. And I guess why you all got involved. Could we look at this too? So my take on it, and it goes along the lines of what you had independently said, and let me read what I wrote. I wrote an email which I sent to the Texas Innocence Project, and I copied to the Conviction Integrity Unit at that Houston office. And somebody from the Houston office called me. They talked to me briefly, and then I never heard from them again. I sent them some follow-up emails, and it's just incommunicado. That's the most amazing thing to me. I haven't quite gotten used to. When I was United States Attorney, everybody returned my calls. Now that I'm retired, nobody returns my
No.
calls.
I'm sure
But
they return your calls
but
real
this
fast.
is what I wrote. This is what I wrote, and let me just read that because it articulates it better than I could now. But I wrote this to the Innocence Project, copied to the Integrity Unit, and I said, I can understand the desperation of a man wrongly convicted who has sat in jail for over 20 years and suddenly sees the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. This was, of course, the hearing coming up. He takes unfortunate, misguided, rash actions that have just the opposite effect. But those rash actions do not negate the fact that the conviction in this case rested solely upon the uncorroborated testimony of Darren Whitaker, an informant run by Chad Scott. Lamar Burks truly deserves a rehearing to flesh out the truth in this matter. But as a result of Burks's action described in the Houston Chronicle news article, no attorney in the Houston area wants to take the case. And let me just, that thought I think summarizes as to what's going on here. But I just want to add one thing to it, and that is when the case went to trial, they only had the evidence of Darren Whitaker, and Chad Scott, I believe, took the witness stand to testify to Darren Whitaker's veracity.
Yeah.
Which is hindsight being 2020 is kind of an ironic joke in and of itself.
Right.
But you'll normally want two witnesses. The law allows you to convict with one, but you need all over the country. But generically, you want to have two. I mean, if a prosecutor had come to me in my office with that evidence, I would have kicked him out of my office and said, dismiss this case.
Mhm.
And if you don't have the intelligence to figure that out, you're fired. But in this case, so they tried to get Kevin Scales again. Remember, he made the original identification. But
Yeah.
Kevin Scales, basically, again, he went off the radar screen. So what they did, which shows the whole mindset mentality here, they go to Kevin Scales' mother and get a warrant or a material witness arrest warrant for her and throw her in jail pending trial. In other words, trying to force Kevin Scales to come out of hiding and to testify along the ways that he initially told the police.
Is there
Uh,
anything remotely legal about that? that text?
Unethical.
it is legal because they went and got a warrant from the court. They got a bench warrant saying to the court, she is a material witness in this case.
She is.
I don't know because she wasn't there, but they got it, which was probably a lie to the court. But the court in good faith issues the.
Right.
The thing is, everybody's acting in good faith. The judge is acting in good faith, it would appear. The prosecution is acting in good faith, it would appear, because they're relying upon the honesty and integrity of the sworn law enforcement officers who are bringing them this case. Okay, so they arrest Mr. Scales' mother. So in and of itself, it's interesting, but there was a case in New Orleans. No, it was actually a case out of Texas, I believe, went before the Fifth Circuit. No, I take it back. It was a case in New Orleans area. It came out of the Fifth Circuit. Bear with me 1 minute while I find it.
While you're looking for that, I'm going to say
Yeah.
this. So there's an old adage in the law, which I came across when I was a law clerk, and I found the citation here. I believe our origin of it. The duty of the prosecutor is to seek justice, not to merely notch convictions. That's huge, in my opinion.
Stats. I like stats.
Today need to stop ignoring you and realize there's a frustrated guy incarcerated for 24 years that made some bad moves subsequent, but is, in my opinion, not guilty of what he's there for. Can we step up at this point in time and do the right thing?
Yeah, that's important.
Where in the history of cases has the actual perpetrator been the sole witness at a trial to testify an innocent sap against? Okay, so there was a Fifth Circuit case that was published just about 6 months or so ago called United States versus Curtis, and it had to do with Chad Scott. And in that case, the Fifth Circuit reversed a conviction against Curtis because it was a Chad Scott manufactured case. And in that particular case, I've pulled out this line, which I think describes exactly what happened here. Chad Scott's team, went to Curtis's 79-year-old mother's house, who lived next door to Curtis, and repeatedly harassed her that if Curtis did not turn himself in, they're going to arrest her. There we go. Right, straight, same MO chapter and verse, as we have with Linda Scales, who was Kevin Scales' mother. So anyway, fast forward in time, what Lamar did was without a doubt idiotic and stupid, but it was an act of desperation of a man who's been in prison for 20 years for something he didn't do, which, if you look at the great literature of mankind, we start with Kafka and the trial, it drives a man bizarre and crazy and insane. So we cannot hold that against Lamar when the independent analysis of the evidence shows what had happened here. And he gets a conviction at trial within a week. A month later, Schumacher is in front of a congressional hearing, which is investigating whether or not the task force was properly shut down. And at that hearing, Schumacher testifies, look what a great job we're doing. We just convicted an unsolved murder, which was related to one of our investigations, the Rapalot records, which you shut us down because of Rapalot. We just solved this unsolved murder.
This is him on the screen now.
That's Schumacher.
He's currently still in law enforcement, has the undignified distinction of having killed more people in the line of duty. I think the number is either 12 or 19, more than any other person in the history of law enforcement. And he's inexplicable. He's forever tied to this guy as being his supervisor. And now he's sitting in prison. Rumor, speculation has it that this guy flips, then this one may actually wind up where he's at. We don't know, allegedly, in an ideal world.
It's an awful situation. Like I said, I just got aware of this case about a week and a half ago because of Tom Madden, because of work and my background and everything else. And none of this is kosher. None of this is how it should be done. And I know as a prosecutor, I mean, this is shocking also to see this kind of behavior here. What if there's a trial? I mean, interesting to see what Chad Scott, if he was forced to testify, what would he say, right? What Whitaker's going to say now? These guys going to what will all these Schumachers say? I mean, it's interesting to get this going. Clayton, I know what Clayton Brown will say. We know what Lewis will say. What the other actors, but put him under oath. I think it'll be interesting to see him in a new trial for sure. Can they also get also accommodations with the judges? That's interesting.
I would think that there's many actions that the conviction integrity unit could make that would obviate the need for a trial, where they can bring him back for the new trial, agreed trial.
Yeah.
Because if it goes through judges and courts, it could take additional years. And then they would say, okay, you have 90 days, like they did in the Florida case. You have 90 days to prosecute or forever drop this case. And then he goes back to the jail. Or they could probably just make him a deal. Look, we're going to time serve you. We're going to agree to time serve your sentence, but the conviction sustains so that they don't have, liability and litigation. Or they can say, look, here's a few $1 million and your name is cleared and go about your business.
I don't know.
What are the options here? You're the lawyer in the house, Peter. What's the reality on the ground, if you can clarify it?
Well, I think you just pretty much summarized it well. I'm not a Texas lawyer, so I don't know what the intricacies of Texas law are in these types of situations. But I mean that what I've always thought, because obviously everything we're looking at here depends upon the words of individuals who have lied before. So are you lying then? Are you lying now? That gets you into a whole mess. But I think, in my opinion, if you take the evidence as it stands today, it just screams out to say, let's have a rehearing where all of this is looked into. So everybody hits the witness stand and tells their side of the story. And then you will see, is this beyond a reasonable doubt that Lamar Burks committed this crime? And it's just, in my opinion, and that's all it is an opinion that, and you can't definitively say, is he innocent? You can't definitively say, is he guilty? But is he guilty beyond a reasonable doubt?
Right.
Just my take on looking at this evidence, I would say he's not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And if I were the judge, and I was a judge in the military system, and I was a appellate judge on the Navy Court of Criminal Appeals for 4 years. And we had our own independent fact-finding authority as appellate judges on that court. Mm-hmm. If this was a case coming before me in my capacity as a judge on that court, and I looked at all this, I would reverse the case. But again, that's just me.
Right. Like you said, it's never too late to do the right thing. We're calling upon the public, the integrity conviction unit in Harris County, and I want to get to a few other things real quick because we're running up against the wire here.
Sure.
So we want to say that, we're very grateful for you being here. We're going to have you say a few more closing notes. So as for this show, Ignacio, as you know, we're rolling into a new segment. It's going to be usually on Wednesdays, Wrongful Conviction Wednesdays, where cases that we vet are going to be on this show on Wednesdays. And some of the cases we're covering are right here on the screen. Dave Reinhardt, first person in American history to shoot a police robot when it went through his window. And years ago in California, he was offered time served. Dana Ewell, triple homicide. Paul Zamat, Kelly Dooley. These cases all have in common. They come out of Fresno, California. 2 years running, the most corrupt city in the United States of America. Mary, my fiance, is a forensic accountant and a fraud examiner, civilian. And she had to get out of there because she helped build a racketeering case against many public officials, and they tried to kidnap her and kill her. And so she's very active in these cases, and we're continuing to cover these cases. I just want to say this. Now, we have a new occasional co-host coming on. Now we have Frank Lordy. He was a county commissioner, went to prison for a falsified corruption charge, got released, took 20 years. He got exonerated, wrote a book, Framed Innocence. Of course, we have Ignacio. Mary's going to be coming on shows more often. She doesn't like to be in front of the camera. And then we have another guy, two guys. So we have these guys were former New York City, what do you call it?
Detectives?
Yeah, detectives, but they were the mafia squad. I forget the name of the squad.
Organized crime?
Organized crime squad. They were the top. They made one of the biggest cases in organized crime history, and they're telling it all and their bitterness towards Giuliani, who took like all the glory for it and didn't give them the promotions and everything they were promised. But it was like huge. It was the Wasteland case, bringing down the Gambino and the Genovese stranglehold on the carting industry in New York City. And a lot of people went to prison over that case. And his book is coming out soon, right there, Revenge Served Cold. And that's by Louis Balistieri. And then we have Vic, his partner. So we have a bunch of interesting guests, and I'm trying to find your book, Ignacio. Pop it on the screen here for a second.
ATF on the cover, yeah. If not, you see my poster behind me. You can see it right there. That's the cover right there.
Here it is. That's right. That's the poster. So he's put this out. He's got like 80 books out, Peter.
That's right.
When are you going to start writing books? We'll definitely help you promote them.
I can't even read 80 books, let alone write them.
Well, the good thing is they're short. Some are short, some are medium, some are long, so you can pick and choose.
Right.
And of course, that's not counting all the shows we do, Bill. Ours, and then I've done, I think, over 300 shows already and counting all over internationally, from Australia, UK, Canada, all over the US. It's really taken fun changing, being in law enforcement 26 years. To be doing this kind of work and having fun with this, and I really enjoyed. I would never met someone like Peter, so I really enjoyed that. Also, worked with a lot of prosecutors out of Tampa and Miami. I don't think I did many cases if any, out of New Orleans, but it's interesting, different takes and different backgrounds we all have, and definitely never would have met Bill. That's for sure.
Yeah, he kind of knew of my reputation from South Florida. I was not a good guy. So here's my first book I wrote in prison about Robert Durst, whom I knew, and from the point of view of crime victim advocacy. My co-author, Gary Greenberg, is a writer and editor with the National Enquirer, hence the title. I kind of wanted to not use that word, but he said, no, it's good, but it's doing well. You see, Nancy Grace covered my first book on her podcast. Yeah. I've been in the National Enquirer numerous times about my reality show on A&E Network. I wrote this one about a bank vault heist in Chicago that went down years ago, true story. And from my point of view, how it could have been prevented and how they could be prevented today. So I do the crime prevention thing. And let me see, another one about Ghislaine Maxwell, which I can't find at the moment, but all of our links will be in the description.
Absolutely.
Peter, I'd like you to wrap things up here if you could in a few sentences, observations, and anything you'd like to promote. The platform's yours.
Thank you. I have nothing to promote.
Okay.
So that's very kind of you. I'm good. Yeah, I just think in this case, Lamar really needs a rehearing. And everything that we've talked about needs to go before a court, and the court needs to make an independent analysis out of that, or the governor of Texas should take a look at this, his particular office, and do what I think would be the right thing. And Lamar served enough time, be he guilty, be he innocent, considering that the co-defendant did 5 years. Lamar's already done 20, more than 20.
More than 20.
I think it's time to let him go.
I agree. Bill, I agree 100% what Peter has been saying and looking at here, even though I've been reviewing this It's just an injustice what appears to have happened here. And 20 some odd years, best years of your life, incarcerated. That's awful. That's awful. But hopefully he can get out sooner because he's looking at 70. He may never see the light of day.
Yep.
He may never see the light of day.
Interestingly, and talking about the amount of years he served, you look at the guy on the left of your screen, Dave Reinhardt, California right now. He's got, I think, a 53-year sentence for shooting a police robot. He went back into town because it was so corrupt, he fled, and he witnessed a murder his father did. So he fled town when he was very little. He only came back for his inheritance. He was baited back in a debate with his sister and the lawyers and this and that. And so at the family home, they claimed he was, threatening, public officials, and they surrounded the house, blocked down the media, wouldn't let him negotiate, basically tried to kill him, according to him, and shoots the police robot. After 2 years in jail, they offer him time served if he would just, deny all rights and access to his inheritance and admit that he was hallucinating that day. He said, hell no. And he went to trial. They gave him 50 some odd years. This poor guy's been in prison. I think it's 25 years now. 25 years. He went for parole. The first parole hearing he's ever had a few weeks ago, they denied him and put him with a 15-year put off. A man who was
15 years. That's awful. Yeah,
please follow the case of David Michael Reinhardt and the other gentleman on this thing here. Links in the information. And we are definitely on top of this. And I'll tell you what, this man here is a legend. He brought us all together here like this. And we're very grateful to Tom Madden from TransMedia Group and Peter Strasser. There he goes in his glory days. And he's this is more of your glory days, because in your essentially retirement, I know you're involved with anti-corruption and stuff. You're helping foreign government and you're very much about doing things ethically. This says more about you to me than your career then, when you're getting a big paycheck and you were an important guy, and it could go to some people's head, but you seem very balanced, and we're just grateful to have you on board. I
appreciate it, Peter. That's too, Peter. That's excellent.
It absolutely means a lot. I'm sure it means a lot to Lamar Burks.
Well, thank you, Bill, Ignacio. That's very kind of you. But at the end of the day, we all just want to do the right thing, and that's why I'm here.
It's never too late to do the right thing. All that's needed for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. The Conviction Integrity Unit, Harris County, please move on this case. We're 24 years in. Step up and do the right thing and help this guy and his family members. You see how many people have looked at this. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Tune in to Inmate to Roommate.
Thank you, Peter.
Yep. Tune into Inmate to Roommate on A&E Network, season 2 of my reality show. I just collaborated with a guy who's got 75.5 million views. I'm going to give him a shout out, Julian Hagins. He's gigantic on the internet, and he and I are going to be working together, promoting myself and Ignacio and my reality show. So thank you so much. And also my public relations firm I just launched. It's called Steal the Spotlight. So thanks again, guys.
Thank you. Take care.
Right under the clock here. William Steele from William Steele True Crime and Steal the Spotlight Television and Steal the Spotlight Public Relations now. Another offering from these channels. Aside from, we have the TV show now with 30, 40 episodes in the can, 2 seasons, inspirational figures. You want to be a sponsor? Come on. We're doing Wrongful Conviction Wednesdays. If you know anybody who's wrongfully convicted, we're going to probably be putting out 2 shows per day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening, maybe less, maybe more, but definitely at least 1 every Wednesday, hosted by me and my beautiful and brilliant co-host, Mary Bass. So everybody knows who she is. Let's see more of Mary. We're going to cover David Michael Reinhardt in California, first and foremost. The guy is the first guy in American history to shoot a police robot. They offered him time served over 20 years ago. He went to trial because of the circumstances, and they ended up giving him a gigantic sentence, 50 some odd years, and then just denied his parole for another 15 years. So this is what the criminal justice system is up to in Fresno, California. We have several other people we're going to cover, and guess what? Dana Ewell, he's innocent. Fresno, California case. Mary discovered it. The case, she's very, very familiar with the case. So she's bringing me up to speed. We have another guy who Mark Garagos covered. I can't pronounce his name, so I'm going to get a little help here. Paul Zumont, okay? Palo Alto, California. He's about to go for retrial. He had Mark Garagos. This man didn't kill anybody, and he's sitting in prison, okay? Then we have Kelly Dooley, another one out of corrupt Fresno County. We're going to be profiling his case. And Oh, Lamar Texas. Lamar Burke. This man was set up for a murder when he was in a whole nother state by the most corrupt DEA agent, probably in DEA agent history, Chad Scott. So Chad Scott's in prison right now for beating people up and corruption and all kinds of issues. And then his partner, who's still a cop, killed more people on duty than any other cop in American history. And he's still on the police force. You can't make this stuff up. Tune in. Wrongful Conviction Wednesdays. It happens, and it can happen to you. It can happen to your family member. Watch the show. Find out what you can do about it. Thank you for joining William Steele. True Crime. Please hit like and subscribe. We'll see you then. Wrongful Conviction Wednesdays, Mafia Mondays, and Inmate to Roommate coming back. Shout out to Bruce Oser, dear friend, and another collaborator on TikTok that we're going to be doing a lot of things with, Julian Hagins. Guy's got 75.5 million views. The guy's a beast. Follow him on TikTok and me as well. William Steele, official William Steele, all across the board. Thank you so much.